Last week we spoke to Nelson business leaders and orchard managers who were calling for Kiwis to work for them during the harvest months. Work that's usually filled by international workers. So what's stopping Kiwis from applying for these jobs and what are the conditions like? Here to help us answer that is Mandeep Bella from the Union Network of Migrants. Morena Mandeep.
Morena.
Thank you so much for coming in to join us this morning and getting up at some ridiculous hour this morning. So first of all, let's just talk about, I want to talk about your story to set the platform for this conversation. So you yourself worked in the fruit picking industry, so talk to us about your experiences.
Sure. I came to New Zealand in 2009 as an international student. And just like any other international students, I was sold the dream that in New Zealand, study is a pathway to residency and you can land a job as soon as you land in New Zealand. So, however, when I came here, the story was totally different. And I was struggling to pay bills, so obviously I was looking for jobs, and somebody suggested there's a fruit picking job in kiwi fruit industry in Tipuki. And so I worked there and didn't know that I'm entitled to have employment agreement and all that. I was offered $9 an hour at that time when the minimum wage was around $12.50 per hour. The work is really physically demanding work and insecure work. So at the time, it was the desperation and a precarious nature of my visa that I ended up having to work in there.
So at the time, you were exploited, right?
Yes.
Please tell me that the industry has changed somewhat. And let's make it clear, not all orchards are like that, right?
Yeah, I wish I could say that. Unfortunately, and that's what I was hoping for. In fact, over the weekend, I tried to contact some of the kiwi fruit employers, to those who advertise for jobs, to see whether things have changed. Unfortunately, that's not the case. In fact, in 2017, Labour Inspector did the audit, which resulted in showing that out of the 62 employers who were audited and 700 odd workers, it showed that over 53% of them were exploiting, didn't meet the minimum standards, and there were 94 breaches of minimum standards found there. So that hasn't changed, and when I contacted some of the employers over the weekend, the wages are close to minimum wage. I mean, like, I do not see why any Kiwi would want to work in there when they can actually get paid more working in a unionized retail store where the work is not that precarious and wages are much more higher than what kiwi fruit employers are paying.
So these are jobs that are usually filled by migrant workers, but obviously the borders are closed, right? So in terms of Kiwis filling those positions, they're not as vulnerable as what migrant workers are, right?
Yeah, unfortunately, there's a narrative that only migrants, that Kiwis do not want to do that work because it's hard. The Kiwis actually are quite hardworking, but it's just that the work itself is not stable, and it's insecure work, and it's in isolated conditions, in extreme weather conditions. So the work is not compensated enough for Kiwis to be feeling like they need to work in that industry. I mean, like, I myself now, since I got my residency and citizenship, if I had a choice, I would rather work in a supermarket than working in a kiwi fruit industry.
So what are the stories that you're hearing from those who are working in the industry at the moment?
There were a number of stories over the years, and there were many employers who were fined tens of thousands of dollars, and those are just tip of the iceberg. Many migrant workers who actually work in that industry, they don't come forward because of the fear of losing their visa, or those who are promised that they will get further visa or a residence in the future, but that's not always the case. And in fact, a recent case of Solomon Island workers, RSC workers, they were threatened by their manager, who also happened to be holding immigration advisor's license, provisional immigration advisor's license. He threatened them to withhold their allowance and to report them to Immigration New Zealand and to not allow them to go back to the country of origin. So those are the sort of conditions they face in that industry. And Kiwis obviously will not put up with such conditions. Yeah. And these employers are so used to exploiting migrant workers that they do not want to offer better conditions to Kiwis. And it's as simple as that.
So how do we get this right? How do we make meaningful change?
The meaningful change will happen when the employers understand that they need to actually pay those workers well, and they need to actually provide them better working conditions and compensate for the heavy work. I mean, like, it's not that the employers are not making enough money out of it. It's billions of dollars of industry. So they can afford to pay more, they can afford to provide better conditions, and they need to work with the unions in the relevant sector. For example, First Union highlighted that workers were forced to drink irrigation water. And I'm talking about a reputable company in New Zealand which did that. And they need to actually work with unions. Recently, First Union, many employees working in the retail sector lost their jobs. First Union could have provided a lot of contacts for them to actually have those workers, New Zealanders who lost their job in other areas, to work in there. But it is just that we do not know any company which has collective agreements with the unions at the moment to provide those better conditions for workers.
So it is a tough gig, but the work isn't recognised in the pay packet. And I know that you've done your own research in terms of ringing around some orchards. So yeah, what happened during those phone calls?
I contacted 3 employers. And one of the employer was looking for around 100 workers, and in Whakatane, in the fruit picking, and the employer said to me, the work is very well paid, and that we'll look after the workers. And I said, what the pay rate would be, and he said, $21, including holiday pay. Now, holiday pay is a statutory requirement. Now, if you take that out, it works out to be $19.32, which is miserly 42 cents above the minimum wage. I mean, like, a Kiwi can earn more than that working for other employers, where they can have a public transport to their workplace and is closer to their home, their families, rather than working in isolated conditions far away from their family and not having good working conditions.
The borders are closed, so this is a chance for orchards, for these employers to get things right, because they're screaming out for workers, right?
Yeah, so there are many migrant workers who are here, who can fill the labour shortage as well. But in saying that, it all comes down to that employers need to actually provide better working conditions to them to attract more workers.
Just finally, sidestepping a little bit, stranded migrant workers will now be eligible for an emergency benefit, so that must be welcome news, right?
Yeah, of course, that is certainly a welcome news, because we have been advocating for it for the last 8 odd months, and unfortunately the only concern we have is that is around equity. We want to make sure that if the benefits are approved under Section 64 of the Social Security Act 2018, the benefit actually is enough for them to survive, and it is enough. It is the same as any Kiwi would apply for, because currently they can get the basic of around $250 per person. However, if they're not eligible to receive any accommodation benefit along with it and hardship benefit, then it wouldn't fit the purpose, because the support provided through Red Cross would have been better in that case. So we want to make sure that now that it's implemented, it's actually implemented properly and with equity.
Mandeep, we really appreciate you coming in this morning, having this discussion, but also we really appreciate the work that you do for those who are vulnerable. Nō reira tēnā koe, Mandeep Bella from the Public Service Association, but also from First Union as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you.